Malawi, 2018. A BBC film crew, along with an undercover journalist named Anaz, has been investigating a series of child murders. They believe that the children are being murdered by black magic Muti witch doctors, who are using the body parts to make magical amulets that would be used to increase the good fortunes of their wealthy clients. Anaz, posing as a wealthy businessman, was able to set up a secret meeting with a man known as Gσ̳ɳα, who they suspect is responsible for at least some of the killings in the area. In their first meeting, Gσ̳�α explains which body parts they consider the most powerful when fashioning amulets for business, which includes the genitals and tongue. Later, Anaz sets up a meeting in what they believe is a remote location, and this time, Gσ̳�α brings along the man who helps him slaughter children for his gruesome business.
We've already told them we'll supply our own body parts, but for the equivalent of around $8,000, they offer us 2 Muti murders and the blood sucking of a young child.
9 6.
And when they finish, will the child die?
Yeah.
How many times has he been able to do successful Muti operations?
7. Tupanga banandi kwenye sipagutu kaya 7 kwenye makampani tapanga makampani na niseme kwenye pagutu kaya 7 au tapoma bono kuta about 12
kwana akaya mtu uli umakoma kwa sasa
mwanarume
yakanya
ika 10 years
muka chusamaria maji
yo nakatutuma rolini rolini
katuma nako.
Okay.
Before they can conclude their meeting, they're confronted by local villagers who believe they're vampires. The killers manage to melt into the darkness, but Anaz and his crew suddenly find themselves in great danger. The crowd begins to shove them around. Anaz and the crew flash their BBC credentials, but the crowd continues to grow and the situation worsens. Local volunteer policemen try to intervene, but the crowd begins to attack them as well. In a desperate bid to save the lives of Anaz and his crew, the volunteer policemen escort them in the direction of the local chief's house. The crowd follows and continues to attack. Suddenly, Anaz is struck in the head with a large stone. Knowing that he'll be killed if he lags behind, he gets up and continues as best he can towards the chief's house. The attacks continue to intensify, and someone attempts to plunge a knife into Anaz's back, cutting through his jacket. The crew realizes that the crowd is not going to stop until they're dead. They run for their lives. They manage to get to the chief's house and call the police for help, and are able to survive the encounter. The next day they approach the chief and ask why the villagers had tried to kill them. In hindsight, it makes a twisted kind of sense. The villagers feel powerless. They're scared. Their children are being slaughtered and no one seems to be able to stop them. And if that wasn't enough trauma to endure, some of these children are being found with their blood literally having been sucked from their bodies. However, sadly, the team was forced to abandon their investigation because their cover had been blown. Anaz and his crew were lucky. Several outsiders in Malawi have been killed by mobs who think they're vampires. And as far as I know, killers such as Gσ̳�α continue to murder small children for their body parts. Belief in vampires has been around a long time. However, precursors to the vampire include the ancient Greek vampire-like woman named Strigus or Strix, who were said to kill children and feed on their blood. They could also change their shape into birds of prey. Or you could look to the Philippines where the manananggal is said to hunt. They thought it could sever its upper torso and sprout bat-like wings in order to search for its next victim. They too were said to prey on children or pregnant women, although it would also hunt newlyweds or couples who were deeply in love. In Australia, they believed in something called the Yara-ma-yha-who. They were said to wait for unsuspecting travelers to rest beneath trees. They would descend on their unwitting prey and use the suckers found on their feet and hands to drain the blood from their victims. And there are more examples, but suffice to say that the basic template or idea of the vampire has been around quite a long while. The modern day idea of the vampire originated in Europe in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, Europe was ravaged by unknown diseases and plagues, and because people in that time period didn't understand how infectious diseases spread, they often thought that vampires preyed on their families first. Some of these diseases lent themselves well to spreading the vampire myth. Quote, research from the 20th and 21st centuries has posited that characteristics associated with vampires can be traced back to certain diseases such as porphyria, which makes one sensitive to sunlight, tuberculosis, which causes wasting, pellagra, a disease that thins the skin, and rabies, which causes biting and general sensitivities that could lead to repulsion by light or garlic. When these diseases and plagues were ravaging communities, people looked for supernatural causes, and fighting the vampire gave people in those communities the feeling that they had some power to prevent the killing of their loved ones. Much like the villagers in Malawi probably felt that they were doing the same when they tried to kill what they thought were vampires in their midst. The historic vampire is the embodiment of the unknown evil that terrifies us, that hunts us, that is trying to kill us at every turn. People back then also didn't understand how bodies decompose. For example, quote, as a corpse's skin shrinks, its teeth and fingernails can appear to have grown longer, and as internal organs break down, a dark purge fluid can leak out of the nose and mouth. People unfamiliar with this process would interpret this fluid to be blood, and suspect that the corpse had been drinking it from the living. End quote. To combat the vampire, people drove a stake through the heart, beheaded the corpse, or burnt it. Pope Benedict XIV declared vampires, quote, fallacious fictions of human fantasy, end quote, in 1749. But despite this proclamation, many people continued to believe in vampires into the 19th century. Today, vampires often make their appearance in movies and TV shows, but there are still people who believe they're vampires, although they're not interested in killing anyone, and as far as I've been able to tell, they don't believe they're immortal or undead. The Vampire Court of Austin is a good example of what I'm talking about.
A lot of vampires experience sun sensitivity, and the theory with that is that the sun is such an intense form of energy, and as vampires we are very sensitive to energy because we have to feed from it. If you stop feeding for an extended period of time, you're probably going to get sick. I actually know someone who had a heart condition, and she stopped feeding for an extended period of time, and they told her she was going to die. So our donors are human. As far as how we do it, the most utilized court method that we promote is a lancet, which is an instrument that is utilized for people who are diabetic. All it does is prick the finger a few times, and we feed that way.
You don't want to go cutting into people with knives or anything, you know. And I've heard horror stories of people doing that kind of thing, and I think it's very important that we educate people on how to do that very safely. There's no reason to go cutting and slicing when you could just have a tiny little pinprick on a fingertip.
One of the biggest misconceptions is that it's just a lifestyle and it's just something that we decided one day, woke up and said, hey, I'm going to put on some black and some fangs and be a vampire. The only immortality that we believe in is what you leave behind.
Here within the next year, we are hoping to actually see a unified vampire community across at least the U.S., if not international borders. So my day is probably just like anybody else's, except for sometimes I might be having a little more fun than that.
And some modern-day vampires believe that they are psychic or energy vampires who are able to feed off the life force of others, although they'll ask for consent before feeding. And the Vampire Court of Austin isn't the only such place. You can find others in places such as New Orleans, Toronto, Britain, and Germany. One vampire, who goes by the name Demon Daz, claims that there are over 3,000 vampires in London alone. So, while you can certainly find the dark side of vampire belief in the pages of history, as well as some places like Malawi, you can also find more benign practices of the belief that are taking place all over the world today.
I've been with you since God knows when. You pick me up at the club and then you take me home, invite me in. The lights go down and we begin.